What if I told you there's a being in middle? Earth older than the stars above Mordor, untouched by the rise and fall of empires, unmoved by the seduction of the One Ring, and entirely disinterested in the war that shook the very bones of Era, a figure cloaked not in shadow or flame, but in lightness dancing while others battled singing, while kings wept. What if that being ancient and unknowable stood between the Nazgûl and their prey, and they stopped? He did not come from the west with the elves, nor from the east with the fathers of men. No lineage traces him, no prophecy mentions him. And yet he was there beyond the great east road. Deeper than any map dared stretch lay the old forest, breathing, creaking, murmuring to itself in languages older than words, and in its green heart lived a presence, not ruler, nor god, nor guardian, something older, something that watched. He had no armor, no weapon, only song, and still shadows would not pass where he tread early. Drafts of the Lord of the Rings, preserved in the return of the shadow, the history of Middle-ear. Volubus 6 Tolkien consider a version of the tale where this enigmatic being stood directly in the path of the Nazgûl as they hunted Frodo, not by accident, not by fate, but because he chose to this idea never reached the final version of the book. Instead, we are given only a dream Frodo asleep. In a house older than memory, hears the gallop of hooves outside. When he wakes, there are no hoof prints, only silence, and the lingering fear that the shadows had come close, too close, but Tolkien's earlier notes reveal something else in them, too. Writers borrow whites, though later merged with. The Nazgûl approach the house, and each time he turns they halt not with a word, not with a threat. Merely by being seen, they stop each time Bombadil turns and looks at them, the return of the shadow. Home 6, the being who watched the ages pass like falling leaves, simply looked back, and death itself hesitated. This was no ordinary force of good. He had no interest in crowns, nor quests, nor the fall of Sauron, as Tolkien described him. The power of the ring had no effect on him. He simply was the Fellowship of the Ring Council of Eland. He was not part of the war, because the war could not touch him, and therein lies the mystery and the danger. Some theories claimed he was a Maya, others a nature spirit, or even a manifestation of artist song itself, but none of these explain why he was feared by creatures bound to the will of Sauron, nor why his voice bright, strange, joyful was enough to banish whites and dark things alike. He is, wrote Tolkien in a letter, not an important person to the narrative. I might put it this way: he represents something that I feel important, though I would not be prepared to analyze the feeling. Precisely. Letter the 144, the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien. The Nazgûl came again. There were 10 black horses, and on each rode a black rider, invisible to Frodo's eyes, but their voices and the clink of metal pierced the night. Cold dread seized him. He lay like a dead man, and the world around him seemed to grow silent save for the wind and the cry of something lost. One of them sniffed the air and turned its hooded head towards him, and for a moment he felt that it saw him. The ring burned against his chest. To the Fellowship of the Ring book, one flight to the ford they had once been kings, proud men of Númenórean blood, crowned in lands long since crumbled into dust. They ruled with wisdom, or so it seemed, until they listened. The voice came from the east, soft At first offering gifts rings wrought in power and knowledge, in immortality, 9, accepted 9. Vanished the transformation, was slow like silver tarnishing under poison air, they did not die. Not in the way mortals do they faded, until their crowns remained without faces until even. Their names were forgotten. The nasal were not merely phantoms, they were hungerade form servants. Of the one, yes, but more than that, extensions of Sauron's malice bound to his will like shadows. Chained to flame their terror was not born of might, but of absence where they passed warmth died. Voices faltered, hope thinned like smoke, and above all there was fear that was their weapon. The Nazgûl did not need to strike, their presence alone broke the resolve of hardened warriors as. Tolkien notes, in unfinished tales they could not see well in daylight, but in darkness they moved. Like whispers of death, their greatest power lay in fear, and their mere approach could crush. Courage even in daylight, they brought cold the kind that sank into bones and froze the will. Horses shied from their scent, the land sickened under their hooves, they were specters of a world. Unraveling servants of domination, of silence, of unbeing, by the time Frodo encountered them they were fully enslaved to the ring, cloaked, hooded, silent, yet ceaseless the Witch King led them a figure once noble, now a shell of ambition and cruelty, the others followed voiceless echoes of. His command they did not question, they did not feel they obeyed, but their limitations were subtle. And Tolkien, always careful with balance, left them vulnerable in unexpected ways they do not see. The world of light, as we do, Gandalf, once explained their senses are distorted, but they are drawn to. The ring they feel, it's called they hear it like a whisper carried on storm winds, the fellowship of. The ring council of Elendis was their curse. They could not find Frodo by sight, they hunted. By scent, by instinct, by the magnetism of the ring, and yet even so they nearly succeeded Bree. Weathertop the ford of Brennan, they came again and again relentless, yet in one corner of middle. Earth they faltered not by battle, not by light, but by something they did not understand in Tolkien's. Early drafts preserved in the Return of the Shadow Home volume, 6 the Nazgûl still at times. Interwoven with the Barrow Wights approached the borders of a house hidden deep in the old forest. And they stopped not because of wards, not because of blades, but because of him Bombadil, a being they could not read, nor touch, nor bind, a presence whose power came not from domination, but from detachment. And the Nazgûl lords of fear were the ones who hesitated, but why their wills were chained to. Sauron, yes, but not all chains stretched forever. Even theirs had limits, and when they crossed into that place where song ruled over silence, where light was not brightness, but presence they broke. Their magic was domination, but domination had no place where power refused to answer that moment. Silent, undocumented, nearly forgotten, was more than a pause. It was a fracture, it proved the Naz. Ghoul were not unstoppable, only unchallenged, yet even they bound to the will of Sauron paused. When faced with a being whose power lay in peace, he is a strange creature, but maybe I should have summoned him to our council. He is withdrawn into a little land within bounds that he has set. Though none can see the boundaries of his own power, maybe, but within those bounds nothing seems to dismay him. The fellowship of the Ring Book to the council of Elend, the map of Middle-earth is filled with places where doom walks freely bared her, where the eye never sleeps Moria, where flame and shadow coil in the dark, but there is one region no shadow dared to linger, an uncharted circle of trees bound not by wall or ward, but by song there east of the Shire and west of the Barrow Downs. The old forest breathes a rhythm older than wind, and at its heart Tom Bombadil lives not ruling, not guarding, but being. It is not dominion, it is presence, and presence in Middle Earth is power. You ever understood the full nature of that place to men? It was haunted to hobbits, it was better left alone, but for those who entered and survived, one thing became clear within those woods: the world changed. Frodo saw it, Sam felt it, even the ring knew it grew silent, there its weight diminished. Its will dimmed. In letter 144 Tolkien explains, Tom is not interested in power, his powers are limited to his own country, but within those limits he is master. He did not resist the ring because he was stronger than it. He resisted because he did not care that indifference rendered him invulnerable, but also isolated. Outside wars burned, armies marched, but within his land trees whispered, rivers laughed, and the dark stayed far away. Yet these were not empty boundaries, they were real, not visible, but felt a metaphysical frontier between the ordered chaos of Ardora and a fragment of untouched harmony, and that boundary meant something in the fellowship of the ring. The hobbits ask if they would be safe from the Black Riders. Tom answers simply, I do not think they will come this night, but do not trust my guesses, for I cannot see everything. My knowledge fails beyond the borders. He doesn't say can't protect, he says won't, because the moment the darkness leaves its own realm and tries to encroach on the rules change. This was why the encounter with the Nazgûl, preserved in early drafts, was so potent. They stopped not because they were banished, but because they reached the edge of something they could not dominate. Their reality ends where his begins, in the return of the Shadow Home, Volume 6. Tolkien's notes suggest a scene where two wraith-like figures approached the house, and each time he turned to them, they froze, a being without weapons, without threats, only presence. His eyes alone denied their entry. There is a power in limits, not boundaries of weakness, but of choice. Tom's refusal to leave his land is not cowardice, it is law, a deeper one that defines the very fabric of power in Tolkien's world. Gandalf understood this. He knew that Tom could not be entrusted with the ring, not because he might fall, but because he might forget, because he exists outside the struggle, outside the narrative, and in a world driven by fate, prophecy, and will. That outside is terrifying. It is easy to name the great powers of the Third Age: Sauron, Galadriel, Gandalf. All of them exert their will upon the world, but Tom shapes his world by existing within it untouched. That is why the Nazgûl failed to cross, not because they were beaten, but because they reached the end of a world where their power had meaning within his bounds. None walked, but with his leave, even Shadow feared to cross. His song, The Fellowship of the Ring, Book 1. And yet what happens when shadows stretch beyond the trees and the riders dare the borders of song? Two dark shapes rode through the woods, black upon black, their cloaks trailing behind like tattered banners of the night. No sound followed them save the thudding of hooves, heavy and final. But when he turned his face to Them they froze, for his eyes saw more than flesh, and his gaze rang like song in the silence. The return of the shadow home Volvo 6. They came at dusk. No heralds, no warning, only the silence that precedes storm or death. The trees shuddered as the riders passed, branches curling away as if afraid. To brush their cloaks they rode, without haste, for haste was for the hunted, and they had never known fear until now. The trail had been easy to follow. The scent of the ring was in the air, thin but pure. Like smoke rising from fire, not yet seen, the 9 were scattered, sweeping across the borders of the Shire, but 2 of them, cloaked and nameless, turned toward the old forest, not by command but by instinct. Something called something resisted, and resistance was to be crushed. They did not expect song or stillness, or a house lit by no fire where the walls seemed part of the forest itself. They certainly did not expect the being who stood before the door, arms crossed, barefoot on the earth. He was not armored, he carried no staff, his eyes were clear and unblinking. He smiled, but it was not a mortal smile. It belonged to a world that had never heard the word dominion. He looked at them, and they stopped. It was not a spell. There were no incantations, no signs of power unleashed. It was a pause written into the fabric of the world, a moment where time itself seemed to hold its breath. The Nazgûl shifted in their saddles, the horses beneath them, beasts bred for terror, snorted. Uncertain, he took a step forward, and they recoiled. In the return of the shadow, Tolkien's early drafts described this encounter in almost fragmented notes. The hobbits go to the house of Tom for the night. 2 Barrow Wights ride after them, but stop each time Bombadil turns and looks at them. Home. Volume 6, the final text, softened this passage. The riders became dreams, the terror a whisper. But here in this unpolished edge of Middle-earth, the confrontation nearly happened, and in that quiet, it revealed a truth deeper than battle. For the Nazgûl are not beaten by force, blades cannot find their mark, fire only delays. But here at the edge of song that does not end, they found something they could not touch. He was watching them, not as a foe, but as a reminder they had once been men, lords, sons of the West, but they had given up all memory, all fear, all choice, and here stood one who remembered everything. Even in the wind did not move in that glade. Leaves hung still, the shadows did not shift, and when Bombadil turned his back and re-entered his house, the riders remained where they were, unmoving. They stayed until night's veil deepened and the ring's pull called them elsewhere. Then slowly they turned the horses. 2 hesitated before obeying. Behind them, the forest exhaled. This was not a victory. There was no battle, but in that absence lay a greater defiance. A song without end had met silence without beginning, and the silence blinked. They approach but retreat. When he looks back, the implication his gaze binds them, for they cannot pass the return of the shadow. Home, Volume 6, and the question remains buried in footnotes and forgotten manuscripts. What would have happened if they had not turned back? The 9 halted there, will suppressed not by might nor magic, but by memory older than their rings. If he were given the ring, he would soon forget it, or most likely throw it away. Such things have no hold on his mind. He would not understand the need to keep it hidden, nor the danger it represents. Power has no grip upon his heart. The fellowship of the Ring Book 2, the Council of Elend, the forest has its borders, the hills, their end even. The mountains of the east great and ancient bow at last to time, and so too does the power of the watcher within the trees, Tom Bombadil the first, and the eldest whose laughter turned away shadow, and whose songs bent the will of the earth itself, did not leave his land, not because he could not, but because the world beyond meant nothing to him. This is the line that so many fail to cross. To see the difference between strength and Will Bombadil had the first in abundance, but the second he lacked the hunger that moves kings and killers alike. In letter 144, Tolkien wrote, he is not an important person to the narrative. I might put it this way, he represents something that I feel important, though I would not be prepared to analyze that feeling precisely power to him is. Irrelevant, the Council of Elrond debated his role. Some argued that the One Ring should be entrusted to Bombadil, for no other being was so impervious to its lure Gandalf ever. Perceptive dismissed the idea he might take the ring if all the free folk of the world begged him, but he would not keep it. It would not abide with him. The Fellowship of the Ring, Book 2, and therein lies the tragedy of powerlessness born of detachment. Within his realm, Bombadil held sway over spirit and soil, even the malice of the Barrow-wights, ancient phantoms of forgotten wars, could not resist the rhythm of his voice. His domain obeyed him not by force, but by nature. But nature, too, and he himself admitted it to the hobbits. East of my country lies the land of the shadow. There my knowledge fails. I am no master beyond my bounds. The Fellowship of the Ring, Book 1, in the hypothetical struggle drawn by Tolkien in early drafts, the Nazgûl approached those very borders they did not step within. They could not, but had they returned in full force under Sauron's command, what then would Tom Bombadil have stood against the Nine? Again, would his presence alone have shattered their will as before, or was the silence of that first encounter a warning rather than a triumph? He is not a warrior. He is not a protector. He is a presence, and presence by its very nature is fixed, immovable, unchanging. Gandalf knew this. He feared it, for in a war of motion, of alliances, of swords and strategies, an unmoving force is as dangerous as a crumbling wall. The ring could not tempt him, but neither could he stop its spread. Beyond his forest, as Sauron grew, so too did the risk that even Bombadil's boundaries might one day crack. And if they did, would he act, would he sing still, if fire burned his fields and the trees fell silent? Perhaps he wouldn't notice. Tolkien hints at this uncomfortable truth. Tom would not have come. He has no fear, but he also has no drive to fight. Lettermugger 144. Even when the hobbits begged him to accompany them, Tom declined cheerfully, kindly, but he declined all the same. He had no place in the storm that brewed over Gondor and Mordor alike. His was not the path of battle, yet that does not mean he was blind. The old forest trembled at the coming war. The skies, dark and whispers of death, crept through the east. If the Nine were to ride again, not as seekers, but as conquerors, would the Watcher still remain silent? But what if they returned? What if the Nine broke the borders again, and this time did not stop? No one has ever caught old Tom walking in the forest white, nor warlock, nor power dark. He walks before the first acorn fell, before the first song of the elves, and he shall walk when the last stone sinks beneath the sea and the last star fades from the sky. The Fellowship of the Ring, Bookmer the wind, does not carry his name. The stars do not Mark is coming, and yet he remains as the third age waned and the world bled into silence. The echoes of the great war faded from the eastern sky. Sauron had fallen, his tower lay broken. The ring was gone, and with it the nine dispersed, their spirits scattered into the void from which no song returns. Gondor rebuilt the Shire, healed the pages of the Red Book, turned but deep in the west past the hedge of Buckland and beyond the twisted paths of the old forest, one place remained. Untouched there, the will of time was weaker, and though the world changed, he did not there know. Accounts of Bombadil after the fall of Badur, no elf wrote of him again, no man sought him. He was not present at the coronation of, nor did he walk the gray havens when the last ships departed yet. None dared say he had gone, some whispered he had always been there that long before the valor came. Across the sea, before even Melior gazed upon the void, he had danced beneath the starlight of the waking world, that he had watched the awakening of elves, and Quivian heard the first cries of men upon the plains of Eldorian, and stood still when the seas swallowed Beleriand whole. He had seen everything and remembered nothing that bound him. This is the fear the wise never spoke aloud, that being so ancient could remain untouched by sorrow and triumph, for in a world defined by conflict, by the struggle of light and shadow, to exist beyond both is not peace, it is isolation. Gandalf once said, he is a master of wood, water, and hill, but he is not the master of the world. The fellowship of the Ring Book too, and what of the Nazgûl? They were not gods nor demons, but fragments of fear molded in a form bound to Sauron. They were scattered with his fall, but power in Arda rarely dies completely. It decays, it echoes in dreams and silence, and sometimes in places where it once faltered. It is said that long after the age of men began, travelers spoke of whispers in the old forest shadows that moved against moonlight, hoof beatots where no path lay, none dared venture. Far the brandybucks posted watchmen near the hedge, and though no attacks came, no harm followed. Something lingered, not the nine, but perhaps near the memory of them, and perhaps too the gaze that once stopped them still watched, not with worry, not with wrath, but with the same gentle detachment that had turned aside. The whites, the ring, and even the dark, for some presences leave no footprint, but their silence remains. Tolkien never gave us the full story in his early drafts. He dared to write the confrontation, then he stepped away, choosing instead to leave Bombadil as a question unanswered, a riddle without solution. And maybe that was the point. Some powers rule by fire, others by fear, but the rarest of all are those that endure without ruling at all. In the end, Bombadil did not fight the Nazgûl. He didn't need to. His very being unraveled what they where the song undid the scream, the root held where the sword would not, and when the last shadows stretched no more, and the wars of the rings became legend, he remained singing to the stones, laughing with the wind, and walking, always walking, for in a world of darkness and fire the only one the shadows fear is the one who never feared